Good morning. Today I'd like to talk to you about money. We all love money. It's fun to spend, it's fun to make, and it's fun to have. However, how do we make money? And how much should we make? Well, I'd like to shift away from money for a moment to talk about freedom. With great freedom comes great responsibility. God created man with free will for a reason. As it says in Galatians 5, you are called to freedom, brethren. Only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. But what exactly is freedom? And why is it a good thing? There are two common views of freedom. On the one hand, you can have freedom for a purpose, and you can have freedom from a purpose. Freedom is the opportunity for individuals to do things, whether that's for better or for worse. In Os Guinness's book, A Free People's Suicide, he posits an idea known as the Golden Triangle of Freedom. It goes a little something like this. Freedom requires virtue, which requires faith, which requires freedom, which requires virtue, and so on and so forth. Now, this cycle represents to us a foundation of the United States into reasoning for foundation. The Founding Fathers wanted us to have political, economic, and individual freedoms for generations to come. After the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Franklin exited the hall where it was signed and was asked by a woman on the street, "Sir, what kind of government have we just created?" His response, "A republic, if you can keep it that way." This returns to the idea that great freedom requires great responsibility. What he meant by this is that in a republic, people are responsible for the officials that they elect to make policies. This was implemented to prevent a mob rule, to ensure that people have individual freedoms, even if the majority would prefer safety over freedom. Now, to get to my topic, I would like to argue today why the Founding Fathers' understanding of conservative politics and economics, modernized for a global world through the form of Milton Friedman's policies of monetarism, are superior to those implemented under Franklin D. Roosevelt and John Maynard Keynes in the New Deal. Before I begin this, I must first define my terms, because economics and ethics and social superiority are not exactly simple topics. First, where do we get the idea of capitalism? Capitalism was a set of principles proposed by Adam Smith. Smith was a British economist and historian who was a contemporary of and well respected by the Founding Fathers. He was hugely influential on their political and economic thought processes. Smith proposed a set of natural liberties that all people deserve and should follow. This includes a laissez-faire view of economics, which essentially merely the idea that the government should not go out of their way to interfere with natural market movements. On top of this, it posits that people need and should pursue as many political and individual freedoms as possible in order to ensure these same freedoms for generations to come in a self-repeating cycle. Now, monetarism, as I mentioned earlier, is a set of policies proposed by Milton Friedman in the middle of the 20th century. It is essentially, as I mentioned, a modernization of Smith's set of natural liberties, but for a globalized economy and world where we have modern communications such as telephones, and we have airplanes that travel all around the world in less than 24 hours. Now, obviously, the Founding Fathers could not have predicted how quickly our world could have changed in modes of communication and transportation. And so it's up to modern economists and historians to reinterpret the words of our Founding Fathers for these new ideas, these new inventions, and the new world that we live in. And Friedman does just this. Friedman proposes an economic principle of competitive capitalism, which argues that most, if not all of the transactions in an economy should be between private individuals and enterprises rather than public and state institutions. On the converse side of my point is state intervention, which is a set of political and economic policies proposed by John Maynard Keynes at the beginning of the 20th century. These were implemented shortly before the Great Depression by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. However, while many believe that these policies led to escaping the Great Depression, many economists today believe that they actually led to it. Now, secondly, we must discuss ethics. What are ethics? Ethics are the study of right and wrong. And while many would ask what the difference is between ethics and morals, which is a completely valid question, for the purpose of this thesis, they are used interchangeably. Ethics refer primarily to a set of morals held by a substantial group of people, while morals is a more individualistic term used to express a certain person's beliefs of what is good and bad. Ethics are inevitable when discussing economics. We believe that morals and money have nothing to do with each other, that one is a set of cold hard calculations, and the other is the work of moral busybodies trying to implement what they think is right on the rest of people. However, these are inseparable. There is no memorization or formulaic thinking that can lead to an inevitable outcome for either of these. They both require critical thinking. Adam Smith, the economist and historian mentioned earlier, saw economics as actually a set of moral philosophy, the way that an economy should be ordered for the good of the people. Back to monetarism as a modernization of these principles. Milton Friedman proposes that there are three kinds of these assets, these subsets of moral philosophies, if you will. Firstly, there are physical assets. These are things such as your house, your tools of trade if you're in a vocation, things that have absolute value and serve some purpose outside of having some sort of monetary value. Secondly, he believes that there are financial assets, which, as we see today, are huge. These are things like stocks and bonds and even your retirement fund. But finally, there is the third set of assets, which he believes is the most influential, and this is cash. This is coins, dollar bills, any sort of thing used in exchange for a transaction. Now, in the days of our founding fathers, there was no credit or debit. There was merely cash. You paid for things up front. They could not have foreseen the digital shift that our economy would have had. And thus, many of their policies and ideas are lacking in the modern world. So it's no surprise that many of them have been overturned by whoever is influential at the time. I would like to argue that monetarism corrects these ideas that are outdated and overturns the ideas that were believed to be held to be correct at the beginning of the 20th century. As I mentioned, the Great Depression was believed to be solved by state interventionist policies implemented by John Maynard Keynes. But modern economists, after evaluating the history and trends preceding the Great Depression, have come to believe that it was actually monetarist policy that led to the boom before the Depression and the shift to state interventionism that caused the Depression itself. Now, while depressions are inevitable in any economy, these federal interventions by the government during this time, the attempted inflation of credit and minting of new money, worsened this depression to exponential levels. This is fairly intuitive under monetarist thought, which posits that money supply controls the value of an economy. That is to say, the amount of cash in proportion to the amount of backing to this cash directly affects the price and value of everything else. So if you have a certain amount of backing, for example, the dollar used to be backed by gold in the federal bullions, if you increase the amount of representation for your backing without increasing the backing, well then each piece of representation, in this case each dollar, is now worth less because it represents less of the whole. Similarly, when they shifted to silver bullion being the representation, they continued to mint more money without mining or buying more silver. This not only devalued each dollar, but devalued the backing itself. When the representation becomes worth less, the backing itself becomes worth less. Now, I believe I've demonstrated well enough the economic differences between Keynesianism and Friedman's monetarism. But when you're discussing economic policies, there is the inevitability of social outcomes. And so I'd like to argue that monetarism has a social superiority to interventionism as well. While many believe that the more liberal policies held by interventionism favors the society rather than the wealthiest individuals in it, it is arguable that monetarism proposes the best solution. While interventionism proposes things that we know today to be welfare, state interventionism counters with an idea of negative income tax. The differences between these are few but important. Negative income tax is a reimbursement of people who are making below the poverty rate in order to compensate for their low earnings, while welfare is a government handout that has very little to no control over how it's used. A negative income tax, while government regulated, decreases greatly the amount of government involvement in a welfare system, which is ideal for the people in it if the goal is more and better freedoms. The second alternative is personal charity. As Christians, we are called to give to the needy. However, we're not called to be forced to give to the needy. One of the primary reasons charity is so important is because it reflects the heart of the giver itself. When the government forces us to give money to them so that they can distribute it how they see fit, they are removing one of the most important aspects of charity that there is, the heart. As Friedman says, government can never duplicate the variety and diversity of individual action. If the government gives money to a homeless person, they see it as a check given to them to use how they please. But when a person, an actual human being, gives to someone that needs, there is a connection formed there, an important thing for any act of giving, because it reflects the heart and the human condition. Secondly, under the social criteria, is the question of personal responsibility. Now, personal responsibility is necessary for political and individual freedoms, especially in accordance with Galatians 5, which I quoted earlier as saying, "For you were called to freedom, only do not let your freedom turn into an opportunity for the flesh." The only way we can allow freedom without it corrupting us as individuals is to have personal responsibility. We must be held accountable for both our successes and our failures. Monetarism is a meritocratic system. It values accomplishments and devalues laziness. The person is praised for their high points and critiqued for their low points. This is priceless as human beings. As we are social creatures, we greatly value criticism, and we often change our lives because of criticism we receive from others. Being criticized for your failures and praised for your successes is crucial to being a successful and Christ-like individual. On the flip side, state interventionism provides more safety. It provides safety nets for individuals. You can make more mistakes without being held personally accountable. But it takes away this important aspect of responsibility. It provides a scapegoat for the individual. It allows a person to blame outside bodies, but not the individual. It allows a person to blame themselves for their low points. This is priceless They are not inherently responsible for their successes or failures. So their successes aren't as meaningful, and their failures aren't as punishing, so they won't learn as well from them. Finally, under social, I would like to discuss the question of education. Education is a requirement, especially to be a well-rounded Christian individual. We must be educated, and we must see the world for what it is. Now, education under monetarism is seen as any other commodity, and this also makes intuitive sense. If we look at the job market, if you don't have a college degree, it is extremely difficult to be employed. It is a commodity to be educated, and it should be treated as such. Supply-demand economics, in this case, provide a good lens into how this should work. If you have a greater variety of educational paths to choose from, all roughly similar in price or availability, the best bang for your buck, if you will rise to the top. This guarantees higher quality and lower price all around. Conversely, state interventionists believe in a regulated public education system, which, as we see today, is often oversaturated and caters to the lowest common denominator out of necessity. There are not enough avenues for success for bright individuals, and while many believe that it would be impractical to implement some other system, they've already begun to do just this. The voucher system, recently begun to be looked at by the public eye, proposes that individuals are able to be given money in the form of a voucher that would have been used to pay for their public education to be used as they see fit. Unbelievably, this amount that is given in vouchers is actually sometimes higher than the price of a private school's tuition. This means that the taxpayers are paying more per person for an oversaturated, underqualified public education system than private parents are paying for their children to go to well-esteemed private schools. This voucher system closes the gap between the two and allows underprivileged people to go to places of higher learning and get better educations at no higher price to the taxpayer. Now, I believe that monetarism is the best synthesis of the ideas and policies held by our founding fathers. It is the best modernization of the principles that we were founded upon as a nation. And I believe that as Americans, it is our duty to pursue these same freedoms that were given to us 242 years ago. We must guarantee that they go on to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and so forth. In order to accomplish this, I believe that we must prevent the further implementation of state interventionist policies that are taking away these crucial ideas of personal responsibility and identity and economic and political freedoms, and replace them with policies made under the monetarist system by Milton Friedman.